Hello, everyone, and I'm very happy to be here today and be joined by Christopher Fox and Darragh Morgan from the world-renowned Fidelio Trio. And we're going to talk, well, they are going to talk a little bit about their collaboration on Christopher's piece, This is the Wind, which the Fidelio Trio are going to play on the 6th of November when they visit Brunel to play in the Lunchtime Concert Series. And so Christopher and Darragh, perhaps we could just start by saying something about how the collaboration came about and how you guys ended up working together, and whether this is the first time that you've written a piece for either Darragh or the trio, Christopher.
It was the second piece I wrote specifically for Darragh. Wrote a piece for him as a solo violinist who was also talking. I think we both quite enjoyed that collaboration. And Darragh had also played some other music of mine. One piece in particular, a trio with clarinet and piano, which he would always been quite interested in having a piano trio version of, and I'd always been slightly resistant to that idea. And then somehow, I can't remember quite how it happened, but it came to pass that I was writing a piano trio, and that was it gradually expanded from that starting point. Is that memory right, Darragh?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, of course, I've known you for a long time, and we've worked together lots, and in many guises. And Miriam Delay, my wife, and I have played lots the Anatomy of Life, which we love as well as Iridescence, that's other solo violin piece, and then of course the other music you talk about. But I think the specific initial catalyst for this trio was that you had supervised Amir Tafreshapur's PhD, and initially the plan was to have a performance of this work in Iran. I think that was in the initial planning. And then I went to Iran and I played your solo violin piece actually in Tehran in a concert, which was fascinating and great to do. But the trio hasn't visited, but the eventual world premiere was at Spitalfields Festival on Radio 3 in 2018 in a cold Bethnal Green church.
Excellent. I think those cold church gigs really focus the mind. I don't know if you've played at the Asylum in Peckham, but that's a very nice church-like venue. But the windows have all got massive holes in them, and playing there in November and December is really focuses the mind to get the thing done, you know, and you can get the heating back on.
I've seen a few asylums in Peckham, but not that one.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's a really really cracking venue for the cold weather. And so, Darragh, could you tell us something about the different kinds of textures and the different approaches that Christopher took in his piece from a trio point of view, and how you guys went about putting together, you know, the first performance, and maybe how you approach the piece differently now after having played it before.
Well, first of all, living with any piece, and especially when you rehearse a lot for a premiere or a first performance, and of course meet a composer and work with them on it. And then live that time. I think it's really interesting, even if you're not playing a piece, but it's just there somewhere in your subconscious. And when you come back to it, not only does it feel like it's familiar, but things that maybe you struggled or at the first time, you know, take a little while to settle in, always seem so much more earthy and part of you already because you've had that experience of performing it live. Unfortunately, in the pandemic age we're in at the minute, our concert at Brunel, though live, isn't live to an audience. Yeah, so the four very crystal clear movements Chris will talk about, I'm sure, in a moment, are crystally clear texture-wise in four different ways. The first movement incorporates lots of great string quarter tone glissandi and extreme uses of vibrato and non-vibrato, and there's a real tension between the quarter tone E flats to glissandoing down to Ds and cross tension in both strings. The second movement for me has got something of a kind of I don't know, musical Morse code. It's completely pizzicato, in the string parts, and I think there's some muted piano writing as well, stop prepared piano writing, and that's got a real kind of different color to it. Then the third movement is, well, I was going to say luscious, but it's an incredibly tense, taut movement. But there, you know, Chris lets us really play in a very passionate, bold way, and really to the extremes of, you know, our romanticized playing of a traditional piano trio style. And then the last movement is really, really intriguing. Idaho, Chris is really exploring, I suppose, inner textures of particular strings. He wants to build up a amount of harmonic series in the cello, low C, and how utilizing the bow over a long, long period of time, changing very subtly in different bow gradients. That creates the bow becomes, in a sense, the left hand as well as being the arco, and it resultant harmonic series that it creates and builds up over a couple of minutes creates this incredible texture, which goes with what Miri is playing with this background, very cool, vibey, distant piano part. So it's a brilliant piece. We really love it.
Well, that's wonderful. It's fascinating. I really I love the way the bow can act. You know, as you said, as like the left hand. You know, and that's a sort of thing that I'm in love with that too. This idea of the bow activating the harmonic series of whatever string is being played as a fundamental pitch. It's such a beautiful sound. I remember that, Christopher, that these all have fantastic titles. Perhaps you could say something about the titles, and actually more generally, whether you had them first or whether the music came first, and what the relationships are between these four very clearly, defined musical landscapes that Darragh was just talking about, and how they relate to each other and to the titles and to the idea of the piece as a whole.
Yeah, I can't actually remember quite what the sequence was. Whether I think I thought initially it would be funny to write a piece for piano trio and call it "This Is the Wind," since the wind. A group with no wind instruments. But it's also the first line of a poem by James Fenton, which I just happen to have beside me in that nonchalant way that one does. And it's about, it's a poem really about history and about disaster. And it begins, "This is the wind in a field of corn." And then it just goes, great crowds are fleeing from a major disaster, and so on and so forth. And we had this as the starting point, as Darragh was saying, this invitation to Iran, and there's a wind that blows down from Turkey, blows south from Turkey across the plains of what used to be known as Persia. And this wind is called Shamal. So that's the title of the first movement. And that's also why we have these quarter tone tunings in the first movement, because they're based on the makam scales of Iranian music. And I think I have a sort of sneaking suspicion that if American foreign policy hadn't interfered with the whole project, the other movements would have been based on other winds in the Middle East. But when the likelihood of the whole piece being done in Iran fell apart, and the possibility of me going and so on and so forth, and the whole trio going, I started to think more widely. So the last movement that Darragh was just describing, the one with the cello open C, that's called Idaho because Lamont Young, great American minimalist composer, grew up in Idaho, and he used to listen to the wind blowing through the telegraph wires and heard what he has always called ever since then the dream chord. And I've stolen his dream chord. But so Idaho is where the piece finishes. And the movement before that is a Welsh movement. There's a great poem by the wonderful poet R.S. Thomas. And and called Depopulation of the Hills. And it's about, a phenomenon that anybody who's been to Wales will be familiar with, which is that the hills are littered with buildings that once had agricultural workers in them, but no longer do. And this poem begins, leave it, the hole under the door was a mouth through which the rough wind spoke. And so that this third movement is called Mouth, and it's actually kind of derived from a Welsh folk song. And then the second movement is called Interference, because a local phenomenon which is now gone, sadly, I mean, it's a sort of, this piece is almost like a relic of a past age, is that I live in North London, and the TV signal used to come from South London, but it was kind of shielded by the hills of North London. So there's a sort of ridge above Kentish Town, and that ridge, particularly on windy days or on rainy days, and when the trees had a lot of leaves on them, that would stop the TV signal, but not in a predictable way. So you get this sort of fantastic interference. So I thought I shall find a wonderful, a wind-based piece and then glitch it. And so the second movement is kind of based on Debussy's third prelude from the first book of preludes, The Wind in the Plain. And that's, so, and then I have nothing more to say.
No, but that's amazing. So these the sort of sphere of reference to do with wind, when the original plan to go to Iran didn't work out, the sort of sphere of wind influence was greatly widened then because of that, and you found other wind-like things to inspire the movements.
Yeah, and I think, the piece became much more, I think it would have been a bit boring, to be honest, if it just, when it would have been sort of too old-fashioned just to have a piece, here's one wind, here's another wind, so this is not so representational. It's more to do with all sorts of different ways of thinking about, I'm trying to think of a way of not saying the word wind, but
I think that's that's fascinating, because the thing that strikes me a lot about listening to that piece is that the four musical landscapes are very clearly differentiated and delineated. They have a very clear identity, and yet the whole piece still hangs together extremely well and extremely cohesively. And I wondered, Darragh, whether there was something that you have to think about in performance or in rehearsal to make a piece like this that is in very clearly delineated ideas and structures hang together when you play the whole thing in a concert.
Oh, that's a difficult question. In one sense, definitely not. I mean, if a piece is good, and most music is good, it often has bad performances, so that's our both responsibility as performers, and our job as musical actors is to bring these dots, off the page, which is what, those great creative people like Chris give us in that present. And, we've got to then somehow act those parts. And I think what's equally strong about this piece as well is that I don't use this word lightly, that the movements are very contrasting. And in a sense, that very subtle contrast is what makes the idea of different movements work so well. The subtle contrast being the fact one movement is lots of glissandi, the next movement only pizzicato, the third movement lots of vibrato, the fourth movement incredibly still. That shows off the three instruments and the medium of the piano trio and the variety of things already hugely, more than just, I think often composers come to the piano trio with a slight reticence because of its very traditional background, and very much a style based in the pump house room style, or the bath, or something like the cello is playing Haydn left hand kind of piano parts, and then the great big pieces, of course, like the Archduke trio, or even later the Brahms trios. There's such a legacy of very, very strong repertoire that composers would often think it's a quite traditional form, and Chris does something. He just uses that tradition brilliantly by just finding his own language in it to create these four very special, unique little nuggets.
And this concert that you're going to come and play for us, Darragh, is part of the university's celebration of Beethoven's 250th anniversary. And the other piece on the programme is the Ghost Trio. And so I wondered if you and Christopher could say something about how the music of This Is the Wind fits against or works with or sits next to this very famous piece from the kind of repertoire that you were really sort of just talking about, the what people really think of if they think about the piano trio. And so I think this is a wonderful program because it sits Christopher's music alongside what a lot of people might have in their heads as being piano trio music. So, Christopher, perhaps you could say something about how you feel about your music sitting alongside that famous Ghost Trio.
I'm very happy that it's there next door. I mean, just to echo what Darragh was saying, I think one of the things about writing music for existing ensembles is that the music history has left us with this legacy of lots of different ensembles, and some of them work better than others. So everybody who's ever tried to write a wind quintet knows that it's not really an ensemble that was ever meant to exist, but it just does. And it's accumulated a sort of default repertoire. Whereas, and then as Darragh was saying, that the piano trio somehow or other got this slight strange reputation from the salons and the pump houses of the late 19th century, early 20th century, of being this sort of I don't know, slightly, too bourgeois for its own good. But actually, I think it's right up there with the string quartet as one of, it's a real Rolls Royce of an ensemble because it's so powerful. And I was just thinking about it before we were talking, that whereas with a piano quintet or a piano quartet, somehow the balance is tipped so that it becomes more oppositional between the string instruments and the piano. In the trio, there's this real sense of, as Darragh was saying, three actors in a drama. And I think that also happens in the Ghost Trio, which is why, that's such a great piece. But Darragh can say more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, just I suppose, to carry on from what I said earlier and what Chris just said as well, echoing that about the idea of contrasts, in Chris's music and the Ghost Trio. I think, apart from, it's great that we're playing it just after Halloween, actually.
Yes.
Even though, apparently Czerny came up with that title about 40 years after he said it. The second movement reminded him of something from Macbeth. But actually, in terms of, contrasts as much as Chris's music, Ghost is full of it. Opus 70 number 1. I mean, the first movement is incredible. Beethoven, we know Beethoven for many things, one of them being for him being able to make music out of the tiniest amount of material. And essentially the first brilliant movement is a scale. Yeah, da 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 da, ya da 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 da, etc. And he just uses this most fundamental of tool that we're practicing, scales from a very young age, and he makes it into this incredibly flash, bravura, brilliant virtuosic movement. And then it has all those other classic Beethoven trends. It's shocking, it's got it allures the audience in, and then it totally brings them all to their feet as well. The second movement, by contrast, by extreme, is one of the slowest movements. You're playing basically in the speed of a 16th note in a semiquaver, and there's 8 of them in every bar, and it's incredibly soulful in almost tormented music. And then the third movement, I always think of the third movement of Ghost as if Beethoven is showing off not just his improvisatory qualities. He has these 2 piano cadenzas in it, which could nearly be like early jazz, because it's like everybody stops on this chord which is thrown out at you, and it's kind of like a big band wah stop. Then the piano goes into a solo, which could be something from the 40s in jazz music, and the way any pianist has to shape it going up over the curvature and back down, and then suddenly we're back in. It's not just improvisatory; it's in brilliant, like virtuosic writing. So, yeah, it's a great piece, and we love playing it.
Well, that's fantastic. I think they make such a good program together, and we're just delighted that you'll be able to come and play this fantastic program for us. I should say that this concert, the reason that we can have the Fidelio Trio as part of our lunchtime concert series, is thanks to a legacy that was left to Brunel Arts by a retired professor of economics from the university, Walter Elkin, and he left a legacy specifically for this purpose, to put on performances of chamber music, and we were given a list of his favourite composers, and Beethoven was very far up the list, so it was a perfect fit that when we asked whether you would like to come and play, that we could get some Beethoven to be part of the 250th anniversary, and also to have this fantastic piece by Christopher in the programme. And so I'd very much like to thank Darragh Morgan from the Fidelio Trio and Brunel's own Christopher Fox for joining me today to talk about Christopher's piece, This is the Wind, and the Fidelio Trio's concert as part of our lunchtime concert series, which is coming up on Friday the 6th of November at the normal time of 1:10 online, of course, because sadly we can't have a live audience, but we're very much enjoying having these live concerts. So thank you both very much indeed for joining me today and talking about this wonderful concert.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.